Welcome to Rock and Roll High School, your choice for in-depth and personal conversations with the most legendary artists in the history of contemporary music. Come with us as we explore the albums and songs that have become the soundtrack of our lives. Here's your host, Pete Ganbarg.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Rock and Roll High School. Our guest this week is a musician, songwriter, producer, engineer, and architect of some of the most enduring sounds of the late 60s, 70s, and beyond, Jim Messina. From his early days producing Buffalo Springfield to stepping in as a full-fledged member of the band itself, Jim's career is a masterclass in how talent and opportunity intersect. He would go on to help form the band Poco with Buffalo Springfield bandmate Richie Furay, a band that helped define the genre of country rock, before teaming up with Kenny Loggins to create one of the most successful duos of the 1970s, Loggins and Messina. Together, they delivered a string of timeless hits, including Danny's song, Your Mama Don't Dance, Thinking of You, My Music, and House at Pooh Corner, records that combined impeccable musicianship with a producer's ear for clarity, balance, and feel. But what makes Jim's story unique isn't just the hits. It's the journey from engineer to producer, to artist, and ultimately to mentor, shaping records from every angle of the studio. So how does someone move from running tape machines to defining a sound that's lasted for a generation? Let's find out. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Rock and Roll High School. Very happy to welcome our guest today, Jim Messina. Hi, Jim.
Good morning or afternoon, whatever it is, wherever we are in the world at this moment.
I didn't ask you, where are you today, Jim?
Well, I happen to be in Tennessee today, and in my home. Just finished a tour. Got home Monday or Sunday. I can't remember when it was, but I'm up and at 'em and in the shop. I'm also an engineer, and so I've been working on getting some equalizers fixed and installed, and then I decided to tear apart a guitar and try to get its pots fixed and changed, and so I'm busy being a little engineer.
All in a day's work, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're on the road all the time, it seems like, right? With the band, you guys are doing more dates. We're recording this at the end of March in 2026, but there are already dates on the books for May and beyond, right?
Yeah, I enjoy what I do. I've got an incredible band. They're all mature. They can play everything from folk music to high-end jazz, and they love it. They love my material because it's so diverse. And we're just having such a great time. We played Nashville last night and night before last at City Winery. And it was really a special, special evening.
Yeah, that's great. When you get to play Nashville, all you guys live down there, right?
We do. And it's usually the hardest place to play because no matter where you are, it's always difficult playing in front of friends and family and professional people. You don't want to screw up.
I'm sure it's fun. The wives get to have a night out and come see what their guys do for a living, right?
Well, that's exactly it. And that's why we wanted to perform here. Our wives never see us perform. And of course, they don't understand why a bunch of guys want to hang out with a bunch of guys when we could be home with those beautiful women. Right?
Been there, done that. Yes. The band is called the Roadrunners, right?
Yes.
And it's Jim and Ben and Steve and Jack and you, right?
Yes, I was very fortunate. Jack Bruno actually played with Tina Turner, Delbert McClinton, Elton John. He's just a seasoned player who happened to, one of the acts was retiring, and so he was able to join. Steve Nieves is my percussionist and sax player. He's really a sax player and really a singer. Percussion is what he does for fun, but he's really good at that, playing congos and shakers.
That's awesome.
He was with me and Loggins Messina back in 2005 on our reunion tour. He was also there in 2009 on the reunion tour. I've got a guy named James Frazier who plays keyboards and sings. He's actually, a guitar player at first chair, but he's second chair so good. I just keep him on the second chair because he's brilliant.
That's awesome. And Ben on bass.
And Ben is the youngest of the group. He's 33 years old.
Wow.
And he is an old soul, and he plays my music from back in the days of the Springfield to the most recent stuff that I've done. And he's just a consummate pro, just a great player.
I pulled up a set list from the other night of you and the band, and it's basically, Jim Messina's This Is Your Life. It's the Springfield, it's Poco, it's Loggins and Messina, it's Mexican Minute, your song that was covered by was it Brooks and Dunn? Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, you even pull out a cover from one of our old friends and podcast guests, Tommy James. You do Dragging the Line now, too.
I love that song when I was a kid. And I was in Warner Brothers many years ago, and one of the guys there, Lenny Warnaker, said, did you ever think about recording somebody else's songs? I said, well, what would you think? And he said, well, I think Tommy James is Dragging the Line. I said, I love that song. I said,
wow.
Let me think about that. And so it took a number of years, but I finally decided to do it. But I was so worried because I do it different than Tommy. He goes, "Ain't gonna live in the old hard way." It's just really laid back and kind of like a doobie kind of. And mine is, "Ain't gonna live in the old hard way, taking it easy." And I went, you know what? I'm going to send this to him and make sure that he's comfortable with me doing it. And so after about a couple of months, I get a letter back from the publisher saying, Tommy loves your version, do it.
He's such a good guy. I don't know if you guys know each other.
I didn't, but I would like to know him. I just, there's just something about him. I feel camaraderie. I need to talk to him at some point in time. I'll send him a recording of this, and then he can.
Yeah, he's a great guy. He's got great stories. So speaking of great stories, let's go back in time. You were born in California. You split your time between California and Texas.
I actually got raised. I was living at the beach. I was going to Redondo Junior High School when my parents just decided to move to the Inland Empire, which was out San Bernardino and Riverside and Colton. I wanted to commit suicide because I was getting ready to go to Maricosta High School with all the beach girls, the beach bunnies, and surf music, and suddenly I was future farmers of America, and I just thought I was going to die.
So at what point, you mentioned surf. I mean, surf music became a big part of your first band. At what point did you start picking up a guitar and listening to people like Dick Dale and? Well,
let's see. I started playing when I was 4 or 5, but not really until I turned about 11 or 12. And then I started a band at 13. That was the first year of high school for me. I went in early, graduated early. I was listening to the Ventures and the Torquays and the Champs when I was 13 years old in high school. So by the time I got to be 14, because I had lived in Redondo Beach in Manhattan, I was already going to Dick Dale concerts, and I thought, had a few musicians there that maybe they could play surf music. So I taught them how to play it. And then we started playing stomps, what we called stomps in those days in high school. CYOs and local high school stuff. And
which band was this, Jim?
The Jesters.
Got it. Because before the Jesters, there were a couple of other bands as well, right?
Yeah. The first group, if you want to get technical, it was in Grand Terrace when I was 13, was the Boutonnieres.
Right.
And we used to wear carnations, which we realized was pretty stupid.
You got to learn.
And then we decided we'd become the Pendletons, and we all had Pendleton shirts and Converse tennis shoes and jeans.
You know who else was called the Pendletons?
No.
The Beach Boys, before they were the Beach Boys. Al
Oh, yeah.
Jardine told me that.
Oh, you're kidding. Well, I guess we're on the same wavelength, right? Well, we used to buy the same clothes. That's the problem.
There you go. And then you become the Jesters, and the Jesters cut a record, and you guys have like a quasi single that works called The Jester, right?
I think so. It's been so many years, I forgot. You know, the weird thing for me, and I can, say this is weird. A friend of mine said, there's a tribute band for Jim Messina. I said, you got to be kidding me. He said, no, you got to check this out. So I went and checked it out. There's a bunch of guys just, probably my age now, playing all that music, the Jim Messina and the Jesters, and I'm listening to it, and I went, oh my God. It's as bad now as it was then.
Wow. That's the power of music. The good stuff and the bad stuff. It's all there for people to rediscover.
Well, you know what I learned, though? There is no really bad stuff. If somebody loves your music, I remember when I got a call from my lawyer. He says, Your Mama Don't Dance has been recorded again. I said, well, I know it's been recorded many times. No, but it's really been recorded this time by a group that's doing well. I said, what do you mean? And he says, well, a group named Poison has recorded it. And I said, oh, well, how are they doing? He says, well, Jimmy, they've sold 4 million of those. And I said, what? And so I listened to it and I thought, man, that doesn't sound like the song I wrote. Then I started listening to their other music and it dawned on me, it's about the art. And depending on what your style is, your genre, however you do it, that's what it's about. And I realized their music had a genre, just like Picasso has his thing and Dali has his thing. And
right, sure.
It's all about the art, and then I started really appreciating how other people record other people's music, and so that was quite of a, to have somebody actually sell some of your music that was popular.
Well, I mean, thank God for music publishing, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Tell me about the Deep Six, if you remember that.
Oh yes, I do remember the Deep Six. Let me just say that this all began for me by a man by the name of Glenn Edwards. I was in high school, and I was in 11th grade, and somehow this guy found me. He was a DJ working at the KEZY radio station in the Disneyland Hotel in Anaheim. And to this day, I don't know how he found me, but he contacted me, and he said, I'd like you to work for me. And I said, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, I want you to produce records for me. I said, well, who are you? And he says, well, I have a label called Ibis Records. And so I said, well, I don't know what that means. What do you want me to do? And he says, well, I want you to listen to the music, and I'd like you to go in with the musicians and make sure that it sounds good to you. And if the chords need to change or whatever needs to change to make it feel right for you, that's what I want you to do. And he said, I'll get you an engineer, and you'll come down to Hollywood and you'll work. So I started doing that when I was a junior in high school. I was placed with a gentleman who I'm still friends with. He's in his 80s, Mike Durow. He was the engineer. And he was the engineer at a studio called Emperor Productions, which was owned by
Bob Hudson.
Bob Hudson, thank you. I don't know why I forgot that, but Bob Hudson was a DJ working at RLA radio, #1 DJ, had made enough money to where he could afford to build a little studio. So those were my first recordings. That was Ibis Records. From there, when I stopped, after I graduated from high school, then I was 17. Mike Giroux and I decided to form a little a production company. And one of the first records we made was by a group called the Deep Six. Dan Lodemoser, Mac, I can't remember his last name, Tony McCashin, a young woman was in the band, I can't remember her name. We recorded this song, just myself on guitar and the drummer out of my old band out of high school. And it started getting some really good play, and we were promised that we would, if we got a label and it got played, we'd produce it. But as soon as it became a hit locally, let's just say the record company said we need to get some real pros in here to make records, and then I don't think it went anywhere from there.
I know another night has come. I know another fear. For in the black and endless dark from which I run, I pray for the falling of the night, the rising of the sun.
But what's so funny is that so many of the names that you're going to mention in this conversation, they end up coming back. Dan Lodemoser, who you mentioned, would later write Vahivela with Kenny's brother Dan.
Well, and he also wrote Danny's song. I didn't realize that either. I thought Kenny wrote that by himself, but his name is listed on Danny's song. I don't know about Vahivela. I haven't looked at the credits on that one.
But, I mean, what's funny is that when you were working with the Deep Six, I read that was the first time that you ever ran into Kenny, potentially, before you even really knew him, because they were friends with him?
Yes, and I didn't know that they were friends together. I was auditioning for a job at Audio Arts. Madeline Baker, who owned the studio, was the publisher of Jimmy Webb. Of course, Jimmy Webb and I went to high school together.
You're kidding. I love Jimmy Webb.
Yeah, we went to high school together. His dad sold me my first car.
Oh, how funny is that?
It was a 1948 Chevy Coupe, which I didn't realize they had painted themselves white, and I think they used some fluorescent white in there because at night when I would drive, the car would glow in the moonlight. So every cop in Colton knew who I was by virtue of my glowing car.
Thank you, Mr. Jimmy Webb's father. Right?
Yeah, and then he later became the minister for my wife and I. Jenny and I married us.
Who did, Jimmy or his dad?
His dad married us.
That is crazy.
And then Jimmy Webb married my wife's sister, Patsy Webb. So we became brother-in-laws at one point.
Man, I just love him so much. We worked together on the Songwriters Hall of Fame board, and I'm just such a fan of his personally and professionally. He's the best.
I'd like to try to get a hold of him and see if we should do some shows together. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, because you're touring and he's still touring.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to your first question, I walk in to audition for this job, and Mike Giroux, who I mentioned earlier, had the job, and he didn't want to work there anymore. Mike was more of a design kind of guy and somewhat of a savant and brilliant, and he didn't have the patience to sit and say, let's try one more, let's do another. Right. So he brought me in, and that's when I saw Mac and Tony and Dan out in the studio, and I asked him, I said, so who's the skinny guy with the beard? And there he says, well, his name's Kenny Loggins. And I went, oh. I says, his voice sounds pretty good. That was it. And it was a number of years later that he came back.
Right. And did you remember him? Oh, you were the guy with the band back then with the...
No, I didn't remember him, but Mike Giroux told me that I had met him.
So after the sessions with Deep Six, do you continue to engineer and produce at the studio?
After Deep Six, I began my apprenticeship under Mike, because at that point I thought I was going to be a successful musician and producer. And of course, I got in there when Joe Osborne and James Burton and Hal Blaine and all those, Tommy Tesco, Glenn Campbell, all those guys were the session guys.
The Wrecking Crew, yeah.
Yeah, they were all there. They could read flight paper, most of them. And I was 18 or 19 years old. They were already good 8 to 10 years older than I was. So I figured I don't want to go back to San Bernardino. So I apprenticed under Mike DeRoe to learn how to become a recording engineer. And that's eventually what led me down the road of more engineering and eventually producing.
Right. And so how did you first encounter Buffalo Springfield?
Well, I was doing a session at Sunset Sound, and Gypsy, the woman who ran the studio, asked me if I'd be willing to come in the next morning and do a session early. I said, well, how early? She said, well, 10 o'clock. I said, well, I could do that as long as I'm not working too late, because I used to work till 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. She said, no, you're scheduled to finish. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. I said, who is it? She says, well, a guy by the name of David Crosby. I said, David Crosby? Is that the son of Bing Crosby? She goes, no, I'm pretty sure not, but don't ask that question. That would be dumb to do. All right. So I show up the next morning and I look at my sheet and it says set up one microphone for voice, one for guitar. And so I set it up, and David comes in and a little later, and I got there around probably 8:30 or 9, and he rolls in around 9:30, quarter to 10, and he says, look, we're going to be doing this session. I don't want a lot of light in here. And I said, well, I this is the only light we have. He says, don't worry about it. You turn the lights out and plug this thing and lamp in. I said, what is that? He says, it's a lava lamp. And I had never seen a lava lamp. It looked like a thing, fishbowl with glue in it.
Right.
He said, just plug it in. So I plugged it in, and he made me do the same thing in the control room. And so the artist shows up, the songwriter shows up, and I get him set up, and I go in. Of course, he wants me to turn the light out. I can barely see my stuff. And so we start recording, and I'm hearing this voice come out. And what I realized, the most interesting thing, it was a female voice. But what I realized was that I'd never really heard lyrics that really created colors and energy the way I was hearing. And of course, I was not into drugs, so it wasn't acid that was creating the situation. So anyway, it was really a wonderful session. And I got done and I said, so who should I put down on the legend here as the producer? And he goes, well, David Crosby. And I thought to myself, should I ask him? Better not. Anyway, who's the artist here? Who's the singer? He says, Joni Mitchell.
Wow. And you had no idea it was Joni Mitchell?
Well, she was nobody at the point. I was just cutting her demo for the first time.
But he didn't even say to you, Jim, this is Joni. Joni's going to sing some songs today.
No,
Wow.
he just said, and I don't know why he would have. It was, to me, I got people through there all the time. It just so happened that at the end of the session, her name was Joni Mitchell.
Right.
And of course, later, we all know who she became. And I know why. I heard that music before it was ever successful, and I understood hearing a great singer-songwriter really does emotionally have an affect, I should say.
Yeah, and that's I assume that's the first time that you're meeting Cros, if you thought he was Bing Crosby's son. And then all these names interconnect because when you start working with Springfield, it's Stills and it's Neil and not Crosby yet, but they're all kind of interconnecting.
Well, what happened is that Crosby went back after the session with Joni, and he talked to Neil, I think, and said, hey, I just worked with an engineer at Sunset Sound, and I think he might be really good for you guys. You might want to try that the next time you go in. So David was really the one who said, this is somebody you should try. And of course, then they booked me with them, which was then, at that time, starting their Buffalo Springfield Again album, their second album.
Right.
So I was their engineer on the second album.
And what was that experience like for you?
The first person I met was really Neil, and I walked into the studio, and there was a big stack of tapes that had come from, I think, Columbia Records, and I believe that Ahmed probably had produced those because they had some issues with their producers prior to that. I think it was Charlie Green and Brian Stone, something like that, if I'm correct.
Right.
And they chose not to work with him anymore. And I believe Ahmed stepped in and did some work there at Columbia Records in Hollywood. But there was a big stack of tapes, and I walked in, and I didn't even know who Neil was. He introduced himself as Neil, and I said, "Hi, Neil, and what are we going to be doing?" He said, "Well, we got to go through all these tapes and figure out which ones we're going to keep for the sessions." And so I thought he was the producer of the band, to be honest with you. He was organized and knew what needed to be done, and very professional as anybody else who came in there. Stephen was the second person that I met. Stephen was really the more creative type in my brain in terms of music.
Right.
Because he was just always in a groove. He's sort of, I wasn't sure I thought he was stoned, but he was just thinking music all the time. He was constantly, and of course, impetuous. He'd walk in the studio and say, "Let's record." And I said, "Wait a minute, I got to set stuff up."
Right.
Richie was the nice guy, smiled and, "Hey man, how are you?" And and over the years, of course, he and I became friends. And,
Right. That's Richie Furay you're talking
Richie
about.
Furay.
Right.
Dewey, I didn't know that well. He kind of stepped in and stepped out. Dewey was explained to me to be sort of an old country music drummer.
Again, you're talking about Dewey Martin for people.
Dewey
who don't
Martin.
know.
Yeah. And that he was more of a country music drummer and played clubs and bars. And to his credit, I will have to say, Bluebird is one of my favorite recordings. It was done live, and Dewey was playing the drums, and that is just one of the most fabulous groove feeling recordings that they've ever done, in my opinion.
Listen to my bluebird laugh. She can't tell you why. Deep within her heart, you see, she knows all the crying, just crying. Yeah.
They were all wonderful to work with. They were very different. They were very professional. I never saw them argue or get into confrontations. They never brought drugs into the studio. They were just really great to work with in those days. You got to realize we were in our early 20s when that was happening. But It was a great experience. I mean, to answer your question, it was a wonderful experience to first start working with them, for sure.
And then when do you get asked to actually join the band? Bruce Palmer starts having some issues with the law, and he's actually deported back to Canada, right?
Well, the first thing after I finished that album, Ahmed calls me. It was 11 o'clock at night, my time in Burbank, and he was in New York, so it had to be 1 or 2 in the morning for him.
Sounds like Ahmed.
Yeah, and so he says, I understand you've been working with the Buffalo Springfield. He says it's one of my favorite groups, and they really need a producer. Would you be interested in producing them? He says, the guys really like working with you, and they think that you would do a great job. So I thought to myself, sure, that's what I wanted to do. That's why I was in LA. So I accepted that opportunity and began working on their third album, which would later become Last Time Around. It was during the process of working on that studio that, as you pointed out, Bruce got himself busted and deported. And they were in the studio talking about that, and that they needed a bass player.
Right.
They did not know that I was a musician. I never told them that. I didn't feel that was appropriate. And one of the jobs that Mike Duro got me to work with was with Joe Osborne. He wanted a studio built in his house, and this was before I became the engineer for the Buffalo Springfield. So with the training I got from Michael, Joe could not afford both of us. He could only afford Michael. And so I agreed to assist if he would just now and then help me out when he was home. I wanted to learn more about the bass because I wanted to play bass on my own records that I was producing. He was a great guy. At times he would sit down and say, well, this is what I do and why, and I use the pick because of this, and I use a concert amp instead of a Bassman because it does this, that, and the other thing. And so I eventually bought a concert amp and eventually a bass like his because that was Joe Osborne. And so one day I managed to buy a bass that was available from Bob Ross Music, who was a copyist there in Hollywood. And somebody owed him some money and he took a bass in. And I said, I really need a bass guitar because I might have an opportunity to get this job. And at first he was going to give it to Larry Knechtel because Larry had seen it first. And I said, well, I would really appreciate it if you could give it to me because I can't afford to buy a brand new one. So he eventually gave it to me. So I had the bass. I had a little bit of experience with Joe Osborne. And they were talking, and I said, listen, can I audition? They said, you? I said, yeah. I said, I'd really like to try. He said, well, yeah, show up. So there were 13 people there that day, and I was one of 13, and everybody had auditioned. And Neil says, is there anybody else out there? Because I was out in the dark theater, and I go, yeah, me. He goes, oh, Jimmy, okay. So he comes up. I come up, and I plug in. We start playing. And within about 8 bars, Stephen looked at me and said, whoa, you know this song. So we did some more songs. And I thought to myself, of course I know. I've been working with you guys for a year and a half. Why shouldn't I, right? So, part and parcel, Stephen loved Bruce, his playing. And Bruce was a very unique player. So Stephen asked me to try to learn the parts with the genre that Bruce had approached it. Bruce kind of had kind of a McCartney kind of role to his bass playing. So I incorporated that along with what Joe Osborne had taught me. So it got me the job.
Amazing. And then that album, this was last time around, the third album and final album, right?
Right.
And that album has Neil's I Am a Child and Richie's Kind Woman. It's a great record.
Well, it was a wonderful, the music was wonderful to work with. I only regret the boys had got to the point where they didn't want to work together.
Right.
And I realize now, Neil wanted to be a solo artist. That never occurred to me, Everyone, he said, wow, why is he, not showing up? He wanted to do his own thing. And as we look back in history, of course, because he had a different direction that he had in mind creatively. So he was not there, but he got I Am a Child there. He recorded it in the studio next door and then gave me the final stuff to be able to sequence and mix.
Right.
Stephen had Buddy Miles, and with Stephen to produce, Stephen was really, really booking the time, making sure everything was there and ready to go and recorded for him so that he could get his work done. Richie took a lot more time. Richie was not a reader, did not write charts. And thank God to Leon Russell. Leon Russell, I told him, I said, I need some musicians. I can't get these guys to show up at the same time. And so he gave me Carl Rydell, I think his name was, and Jimmy Karstein, who later become very, very significant popular musicians, but they were just starting out then. So I brought them into the studio and wrote the charts for the stuff that we needed to do so that Richie could participate. But once everybody turned everything in, then it's as a producer, you got to create the golden thread that ties it all together.
Right. It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, right?
Yeah, but it's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together, but having different palettes to paint the different pictures of the puzzles.
Right, especially when you have, Stephen's voice and Neil's voice creatively and Richie's voice. That's a lot on a young man's shoulder like yourself.
Well, fortunately, I'd had a lot of experience working with all kinds of singers and players before then. So the key for me was to try to find the glue to glue it together. And I think working at Sunset gave me an opportunity. I had a great chamber. I could remix everything in the same room. I had some great compressors at Fairchilds and different things that I could actually use to create the warmth that was needed. And once I tied it all together, it was a lot of work. I was worried about it not feeling right, but after I tied it up, the one person who gave me the most encouragement was Paul Rothschild, who'd been doing the Doors there, and I'd sat in on a couple of those sessions to help out. And he first heard the record, and he said, "Jimmy, this is really a good record." And I thought, "Oh, good." He's
wow.
having a pro say that, and I know he wasn't blowing smoke.
Yeah, no, that's real validation because, again, like you said, you're maybe 21 years old.
Yeah, I don't think I was 21. I was 19.
That's really young to be doing what you're doing. At what point, the band, it sounds like it's about to implode. At what point do you and Richie discuss, hey, why don't we form our own band, and that which ends up becoming Poco?
Well, one of the days, we're still working. I'm still trying to finish the album. And one day I was in the backseat of a taxi with Richie, and we were heading to a music store from what I remember. And I asked him, I said, what do you want to do, afterwards? And he goes, I don't know. I really don't know. And I know he was anxious about it because this was an important band for him. And I said, well, if you feel like it, I'd like to be in a band with you. I'd like to come back to playing my guitar and instead of doing folk music, which I think, it's over. You've written songs like Kind Woman and Charles Claim to Fame, which are more country-ish. How about we maybe thinking about something more country rock than folk rock? He says, well, I really don't know. Now you have to realize that before I ever worked with the Springfield, I had built the studio for Joe I told you about, but we also built a studio for these folks from Shreveport, Louisiana, Sonny Jones and Al Jones, and their sister, from what I recall, had been married to the late, great Hank Williams as well as Johnny Horton.
Wow.
And when we finished building the studio, they asked if I would stick around and just do some sessions because they wanted to just have an introduction to the studio and bring some of their friends over who were musicians. And I said, sure, I'll do it. Well, they show up, and it turns out to be Roger Miller, Dorsey Burnett, James Burton, Joe Osborne, Keith Allison, Jerry Allison of the Crickets.
Jeez.
And I went, holy smokes, this, and I'm sitting mixing this stuff, and I'm thinking, this is some of my favorite music, because I loved rockabilly growing up. I listened to Elvis Presley and Ricky Nelson, and, it was all just, I was so excited about it. So fast forward to our conversation, I had already been enthralled with these players and this music and working at that studio. So the idea of maybe doing something in our own style, Richie and I, was exciting. So anyway, I finally get to these guys to New York, the Buffalo Springfield. Turns out Neil didn't get on the plane. Stephen did. Duke did. Myself and Richie. We show up Monday morning to do a session while Stephen's not there. Someone's in the village visiting friends, and of course Dewey wasn't there. And when Dewey shows up, as I say in concerts, Dewey was a very spiritual guy. Most people know that he was into the spirits pretty deep. In fact, he showed up extremely spirited the day of the session, and could not sit on the stool. He fell off.
Oh, boy.
So Arif Mardin,
the great,
came in and said, is there anything I can do? And I said, I really need some musicians I've got some songs here that we need to record. That's why we came here. He said, I'll get you the best musicians in New York. And he did. Richard Davis on bass. Wow, what a player he was. But the problem was they were all jazz cats. So I recorded Kind Woman, and I recorded my song, which was Carefree Country Day, which Dewey was supposed to sing, but he was so drunk. In fact, if you listen to the original recording of that, you'll hear in the background, there's stuff that I couldn't get over.
So that's, if you listen to the original version of Carefree Country Day, you'll hear
Dewey.
Oh, yeah.
You'll hear Dewey in the Martin go, just the black, and it's just all over the place. So that's when Richie said, you should sing it.
I'm just a bucking time without a reason to rhyme. Oh, what a wonderful way to spend a carefree country day. Oh, yeah, I got to have it that way.
So he encouraged me to sing it, and I just at that point in life was not much of a singer. And so anyway, I did. And we get back to LA, and I'm listening to Kind Woman, and I went, we've got to do something about this because this does not sound like the Buffalo Springfield. I said, we did use James Burton on Child's Claim to Fame on the second album. I said, why don't we get a steel guitar player like Red Rhodes or Sneaky Pete or Buddy Emmons, somebody like that. And Miles Thomas, who was our road guy, he says, you guys ought to think about, he says, I know somebody in Colorado, a young guy, is about your age, really good player. I think it'd be good if you brought him out. And I said, but Miles, I said, that's flying somebody out, put him up at the hotel. I'm producing this thing. I got to keep the budget going. He says, well, Jimmy, any of those guys you just mentioned, they're triple scale players. It's going to cost you $750, $800 to just have them in there for 3 hours. He says, you could get a plane ticket for $50, and hotels in those days were $25 a night. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. I said, what's the guy's name? He says, Rusty Young. So we bring Rusty out, and Rusty was thrilled to come. Well, he had this beautiful steel guitar that was made out of aluminum and stainless steel, and these gorillas at the airport threw it off the plane, landed on the concrete tarmac, and busted it.
Hey.
So we show up, and he opens up the case, and it's broken. So I said, well, you know what? Good news is when Stephen and I were out on the road this last time with the Beach Boys, Stephen went to a hawk shop and bought a steel guitar, and it's here. And I'm thinking, wow, I've just saved the day. Of course, nowadays, you go to a hawk shop and buy a guitar, you might as well use it for a planter. That's about all they're good for.
Right.
And
so Rusty picked it up, and that was Rusty, the beginning, right?
Well, he picks it up, and it's just, first of all, the pedals all do different things. It's got cables instead of rods. I didn't know that. Like on a car, if you step on the pedal on the right, that means gas, and the one in the middle means stop. Well, on this steel that he had, it was all opposite. I didn't know it. He never complained. I roll the tape, press the record, and I'm listening to this recording, and it's just unbelievable. And plus, the steel guitar had 2 necks, and I didn't know this until recent years. But the first neck is a country neck, and it's tuned to A. Well, the second neck is a jazz neck, and it's tuned to C9. And the country neck did not work. He didn't tell us that either. So the solo that you hear is done on a C9 steel.
Kind woman, don't leave me lonely tonight. Are you saying it's all right?
It was unbelievable. And I looked at Richie and I says, that conversation we had in the taxi cab about maybe we could do something more country rockish instead of folk rock? He goes, yeah. I said, I think this guy is the guy. And that was really the beginning of the idea of putting Poco together.
Right. And I heard that Poco was not the original intended name for the band.
Well, we were going to call ourselves Pogo, and we showed up at the Troubadour. And as we were getting ready to go, to sound check, we get served by attorneys from Walt Kelly saying, if you use that name, I'm going to sue you and take everything you own away. Of course, I only owned a Telecaster and an amp, but that was, to me, a lot.
Well, Walt Kelly was a comic strip artist who drew a comic of a possum named Pogo. And so why they would be litigious to go after a brand new band who, basically, like you said, owns a guitar and an amp. But anyway, whose idea was it to change the G to a C on the marquee?
Well, that was Dickie Davis, because he was the one that brought the good news paperwork to us. And he's looking up as they're putting the sign up there. And he goes, let's take the tail off of that. He goes, what are you talking? He said, get the G out of there. Just put a C up there. And he goes, okay, Poco. Well, that's close enough. We'll just tell everybody they misunderstood. So that's how we became Poco.
That's awesome. And Rusty, up until his death a few years ago, became probably the longest standing member of Poco, right?
Well, he was, and his books hopefully comes out pretty soon. And there were certainly some ups and downs and trials and tribulations about that. But I think one of the things he told me was that he didn't think that Richie would ever leave the band, and they were all flying into California. They were going to meet with David Geffen, and I think Rusty was under the impression that maybe David would manage the band at that point.
Right.
But what happens is that, according to Rusty, David comes out and says, Poco is no longer going to be together. I'm forming Souther, Hellman, and Foray. But, you guys are going to have to find something else to do. Tim, you'll be okay because you write songs, but Rusty, you might need to get another job. That was when Rusty just panicked and thought to himself, oh, my God, if this is going to work, I'm going to have to learn to write songs. And God bless him.
He did.
He did, and he had a huge hit with Crazy Love.
Great song.
And it made it possible for him to continue to work and make a living.
It happens all the time. This crazy love of mine wraps around my heart, refusing to unwind. Ooh, crazy love.
Yeah, unbelievable. I heard that you had said that Poco was supposed to play Woodstock. You were asked to play Woodstock, but the manager at the time turned it down?
Yeah. He said we already had a gig.
Oh, yeah. That's not good.
Yeah. And we didn't know what that meant either. Woodstock was this thing out. Where was that? In what is that? New York or something?
Yep.
Yeah. And it's like we were poor, and nobody knew that was going to be as huge as it was. But
hindsight's 2020, right?
Yeah. At least we made some money that night.
There you go. So, at what point do you leave the band and then get your own kind of staff producer gig at CBS?
Well, I was beginning to realize that my relationship with Richie was becoming difficult, and that he was very, very frustrated that we weren't having the success that he felt, we should have. Neil was a success. Stephen was a success, and I think he felt whatever he felt, it just was starting to manifest in ways where it was affecting my relationship with him. I could see more anger in his eyes and disappointment. I would do something. It was sort of like, I remember one time we were in the control room at Columbia Records, and he was trying to hit a high note. And in those days, we had what's called a machine room, and it was a union session. And I was not allowed to touch anything in CBS Records as far as equipment.
Right.
Even though I was an IEBW union guy, and that's who ran the shop, there was collective co-bargaining agreements that stated that no artist could touch the board. Oh. So in another room, there's a guy with one of those, they used to have the video machines that they turned into 16-track machines. They had a big red button on them.
Right.
Kind of like the size of that button you push when you want to get water in your eyes because you just got chemicals all in it. So he would look at me, and I'd say to him, now, when I point my finger, you punch. And we must have done 13 or 14 of these, and we'd hit them, and Richie was having an issue. And the one time I look at the guy and to punch, he's looking at a magazine, and he looks up and he punches late.
Oh, boy.
So Richie said, I got it that time. And I said, I think you did get it. I said, but I'm not sure that we got it. And he said, well, I got to hear it. And he come in and he pushed me out of the side, and he listened to it. He said, well, I guess if I'm going to get something, I got to do it myself if I want it right. And that was that time I went, you know what? Maybe he's right.
Right. This isn't going to work. Right.
Yeah, I don't want to get into I don't want to have what happens in a lot of other bands where you get into fights and fist fights and I loved him. He was my best man at my wedding, and I just thought it's time to make a change.
Are you guys still in touch?
Yes.
Yeah, because he's still alive and kicking. God
Yeah,
bless.
I just spoke with him. Golly, I don't know. It was about a month ago. I check in with him every once in a while. We have a few laughs. I was trying to get him to come out and do some shows with me, but he told me he just is tired of traveling and that he's retiring. So I don't know. I don't know if he's finishing up some shows or maybe doing less or whatever.
Well, the other thing I would say about Poco before we move on to the next phase of your career is that, it was you and Rusty and Richie, but it was also Randy Meisner. And Randy Meisner, when he left, is replaced by Timothy B. Schmidt. So there's a whole Eagles motif going on here, too.
Yeah, I was there when Randy left. I was in the control room that night when Randy showed up. I think Randy showed up with a bunch of people, and I had asked that we not bring people down while I'm mixing, to visit and party. And Richie, I guess, met him out there, and I don't know what happened, but he decided to quit that night. But as far as Timothy, I understood that he also auditioned about the same time Randy did. I don't recall that, but I was told that. So he was in the background when Randy left, and fortunately for us, was a good choice to bring in.
Great choice. Bass player, singer, great musician. Yeah. So talk about, you take this gig at CBS covers Columbia and Epic, right?
Well, yeah, CBS owned Columbia Records, and Epic was a subsidiary.
Right. So you go in and you have your choice of artists to work with on the roster, right? So there's the potential to work with Andy Williams, who you don't think is a match for what you do and what he does. And then you meet a young singer named Dan Fogelberg.
It was Bonnie Garmer who sent Dan Fogelberg to me. And I really liked Dan. One of the things I do with every artist is before I would work with them, I'd say, what is it that has drawn you to me, and what is it that, why is it that you think I would make a great record for you? Because I want to know what people's expectations are.
Sure.
And Dan said, well, I want to make a Poco record. And I said, Dan, that's not something I can do, and I'll tell you why. I said, I just spent the last 3 years of my life making Poco records. They were too country for rock and too rock for country, couldn't get any airplay. And I couldn't make a living. And I said, I just cannot go down that road again. If that's something you want to do or need to do, you're going to have to find somebody else to do it. So I chose not to do that. Then Don Ellis calls me, who I had never met before. He had been hired by Clive Davis as a creative artist development, and said, hey, I'm calling you because a friend of mine, Dan Loggins, who I worked with at Tower Records, a good friend of mine, has a little brother who we think is very talented. We're wondering if you would consider producing him. This was in July while I was still working on Delivering. I said, well, you know what? I need to finish my job here first. Part of my deal, which I had not gotten yet, I'd traveled. In fact, I think Clive talks about it in his book. But I asked if I could meet with Clive, and he was very busy. And he says, if you want to ride on a train with me to Philadelphia, I can meet with you during that time. So during that time, I asked him that I'm planning on leaving Poco, and I would like to have an opportunity to perhaps get a job with CBS as an independent producer. And, he said, I see. He said, but I'll tell you something. But I think I'm happy to listen to what you want, but in the meantime, you'll need to get yourself replaced, and you'll need to finish that record, and I want you to leave in good standing so that, there's nothing's going to hurt this band's ability to move forward. I'm paraphrasing right now. And I said, I don't have a problem with that. I will do my very best to make sure that happens and that I leave on good standing. So from that point on, I was in the process of finishing the Delivering album. We needed to get somebody to replace me. Paul Cotton was someone that the boys had thought they would like to have. And I said, well, I'll share a room with him, because we didn't have a lot of money in this. I'll share a room with him and I'll teach him the guitar parts. So he and I shared a room for 2 or 3 weeks out on the road, and during our off time, I would show him the parts so that he knew what he needed to know, so that when he started, he'd be, hitting the ground running. And on October the 31st at the Fillmore, I did my last date, 1970, and he took over at that time, and we remained friends as the years went by. I mean, he helped me with my son when his mom decided to leave, and he helped me, and I just thought the world of Cotton. And but he did a great job. And after I finished, Clyde was happy with how things had ended. He was happy with the record, and so he spoke with my attorney, and they negotiated a deal for me to work there.
Wow. And then talk about when Don Ellis, through Dan Loggins, comes to you with Dan's brother as a recommendation. Talk about that first meeting, because I've heard you tell the story. It's pretty funny.
When I spoke with Don in December, he told me that he had some tapes that they had recorded on him. And I said, that'd be great, but let me get back home around November or so, and I'll take a listen to them. So I get a call. This voice says, "Hi, my name's Kenny Loggins, and I got a few tunes that I hear you might like to hear." Don Ellis said. I said, "Yeah, I remember talking to Don." He said, "Yeah, I'd like to do that. Come by, we'll have some dinner." And so he shows up. I didn't know what to expect, but here was a guy like 6'2". He had had long hair, long beard, braces like a Buick on his teeth, parting his hair, and wearing jeans. Looked like he had a load in his britches. Was a velour short, and I'm thinking, whoa, come on in. And I wasn't sure what was going on, because I'm thinking we're developing a rock and roll star here, right? So I talked to him, and he was very sweet, very, very nice and stuff. And so I said, "So let's hear your tapes." He said, "Well, I don't have any tapes." I said, "Oh, Don Ellis had told me you had some tapes. How about, pull out your guitar. Let me hear you. I don't own a guitar."
Very promising, very auspicious.
Yeah, I'm thinking to myself, my wife was an actress, and that was the time when John Ritter and Bo Bridges were all in our 20s, and these guys used to play jokes on me all the time. And I'm looking around to see if there's cameras, at this. So I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I have a couple of guitars here. I have a steel string, I have a nylon string. You're welcome to either one." He said, "I'll take the nylon one." So I said, "Well, there's the recorder, there's the microphone, there's a stool, here's the guitar. You know what to do. I'll press record." And I did. And that evening he played Danny's song. He played House at Pooh Corner. He played Santa Rosa, My Love's Gonna Tumble on You. I think he also did, I think it was Vihivela or Sail in the Wind, one of those two. And so we had a pleasant talk. He left, and my wife says, "So what do you think?" And I said, "Man, I don't know what to think, because most of this stuff is folk songs. I mean, Peter, Paul, and Mary and the Kingston Trio are over, and I just don't know what I'm going to do." And I was worried, because I'd already turned down Andy Williams. I turned down Dan Fogelberg. Olivia Newton-John, I loved her, but she wanted to be a pop artist. I wanted to work with creative songwriters and performing artists, as opposed to finding songs for somebody. I thought, well, so I called him back, and I sat down with him, and I said, "So what do you do for a living?" He said, "Well, I write songs." And I says, "Yeah, but you don't own, what do you play, piano or something?" He said, No. I said, I have an old guitar. I just don't like to play it that often. I says, "Well, what kind of songs do you write other than folk songs?" And he said, "I can write any song pretty much." I said, "Well, give me an example." He said, "Well, the publishers, if they needed, a Leon Russell kind of song, I can do a Leon Russell." He starts singing like Leon Russell. He imitated his voice almost perfectly. If they need an Elton John song, I can do Elton John. So he starts singing like Elton John. They need James Taylor. And I was blown away that he could do that. And I also thought at the same time, You know, he's got this voice. If I can find his voice, and he can sing the various genres that he's obviously done for the publisher, maybe I could find the songs and the material as a producer to get him the opportunity to have a better chance at having airplay and not get stuck with it being country rock or being this or that, because he could do different styles. And that's what really motivated me to want to work with him. But what I didn't realize is he never had a manager, he never had an agent, didn't have a band, didn't have a business manager or an attorney.
So that's a lot of heavy lifting for you.
It would be a lot of heavy lifting, but I decided that I wanted to give it a shot. And so I started getting him the band, the rehearsal space. He had no money. My father-in-law actually gave me the pool house. My father-in-law was Barry Sullivan, the actor, who was a very famous actor and lived in Mulholland Drive and had a beautiful house at the top. And a pool house, which was just big enough for me to audition musicians and give Kenny a place to work to start. And because I had such great relationships with people in the music community, with studios, having been an engineer, I was able to take all of that music and demo it at least 2 or 3 times and be able to sequence into a record that I believed would be a great record that I could then give to Clive Davis. And that was when Clive said, I like this. This is nice.
Wow. So what's so interesting is as you tell the story, it sounds like, you are coming from a place of experience and Kenny is coming from a place of, as they say, just falling off the turnip truck. But it turns out that you guys are pretty much the same age. You're 1 month apart.
That's right.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I got into doing this
Really young.
in high school. I was producing records in high school. And, and my personal life, I didn't have much of a personal life because my parents were divorced and I would have preferred to be with my dad, but I'm with my mom. And at 13 years of age, I just said, I gotta get into the music because I love music. And so I already knew what I wanted to do when I was 13.
Right. And what's so smart about what you did is not only did you train as an engineer, but you also trained as a musician, as a bass player. So when you're in a situation with somebody like Kenny, who's got ideas but doesn't really know what to do, you can help him as a musician. You can help him as an engineer.
Right. Kenny really did his part of heavy lifting when it came to singing, when it came to, getting vocal parts together. He's very creative. Some of the music that he wrote already, like Pooh Corner, when he sang it to me, was a folk song. But when he showed me that Nitty Gritty Dirt Band had a hit, or at least recorded it, it just wasn't right yet. And one of the things that I thought that he should do would be to consider doing Pooh Corner more as a song that would be ethereal, that would have pictures and images in it to where it would be more childlike.
Right.
And it was, I have to thank Steve Spielberg for really helping me to do something early in life that I never thought I would ever be able to use. But he was doing a movie with Barry Sullivan, my father-in-law, and he and I are about the same age too. And his first movie was called Clear and Present Danger, which was about smog in California. And he had been working with Barry, and I met him there one night, and we were talking. I'm just starting out in the music business. He's starting out in the film business. And I remember asking him about music. I said, how do you feel music, how do you use it? How do you want to use it? And he said something to me that really stuck to my mind and my head. He said, music has got to enhance not only the dialogue, but it needs to enhance the scene, which also needs to enhance the whole movie as it's coming together. The music should basically help to create a scene within a scene so that you have the emotional support of what's being delivered through the dialogue.
Right.
And create an environment. And later I started thinking, writing songs is not much different than writing a script. We have a lyric, we have a content, we have a construct. And so I began thinking in those terms. And about the time when I started working with Kenny, I decided, let's take Christopher Robin, and do a song where you can actually see and feel him moving, through the music.
Right.
And when we brought in Michael Amardian and we decided to use that Farfisa that starts dun, 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 dun. And then I said to Kenny, I wanted to find out whether he can play guitar or not. I said, let's create something that has a round going on here. So the music went ba da 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 on one guitar, and then the other guitar started. And all of a sudden it started to shape up to where there was a scene happening with the music, with effects. I did that on.
Very cinematic.
Yeah, and I did that with Full Sail too.
Right.
I had a guitar that had a squeaky strap, and in the beginning it feels like you're hearing ropes. That's just my guitar strap, and then I had the percussionist bring out a bell, ding ding, ding ding.
Right.
Two bells.
Right.
And it becomes cinematic, as you pointed out.
So help me if you can. I've got to get back to the house at Pooh Corner by 1. You'd be surprised, there's so much to be done. Count all the bees in the hive. Chase all the clouds from the sky. Back to the days of Christopher Robin. Back to the ways of Christopher Robin.
Yeah, I mean, which is fantastic. You think about this debut album sitting in, it's got Pooh Corner on it. It's got Danny's song on it. It has Vahivala on it.
I'd secretly steal a show. Natives were waiting for the lazy soul to sing with a sailor. Vahivala, homeward sailor. Vahivala, homeward sail away. Vahivala, homeward sailor. Vahivala, homeward sail away. Every evening night we go.
It also has your song, Listen to a Country Song, that was later covered and was a big hit by Lynn Anderson,
Right.
that you wrote with Al Garth, who played on the record. But at what point, you're still the producer, right? You don't expect to be part of the group. How does that happen?
Well, as I said, Kenny didn't have a manager, an agent. He didn't have a band. So in the process of putting it all together, I found Merle Briganti and Larry Sims was part of a group called the Sunshine Company, and they'd opened for Poco. We became acquainted, and after a while, I realized that band had broken up. So they were in the back of my mind. Now, Al Garth lived below me and Jenny. He rented a little space in the same house that we did. He was a computer programmer, but had a saxophone, and I'd hear him playing a saxophone at times. Michael Amardian was a friend of Kenny's. They had done some things together, Gator Creek or something like that. But in the process of putting all this together and building it, I realized that, boy, if he didn't have somebody there to help put it together, we'd be in trouble. And I could not get any managers to manage him. I tried. At that time, Jim Guercio had a company, and Larry Fitzgerald was running it. And they were not interested. I tried Shipman and Larson. They weren't interested. And I thought, well, if I make a record and it gets released, it's not going to go anywhere unless there's support. You
Right.
just got to have that support. So it was in my mind. I thought, you know what? How about I introduce Kenny to my audiences, which was really Buffalo Springfield and Poco.
Right.
And the way to do that would be to do it the way Stan Getz and Charlie Bird had done it, the way Leon Russell has done it with Joe Cocker.
Sure. Yeah.
Is if I could just sit in for one
Cycle?
tour.
One album cycle? Yeah.
Yeah, one album, just sit in for one album, one tour, get him launched, get him a road manager, get him I needed to find a manager who would get him first, because you don't want to go with an agency first. You got to find a manager who has a relationship with an agency that they can trust to help build their acts. That's the way it used to work. So I had suggested to Clive, because, well, actually, he's a smart guy. He heard the music and he goes, "Man, I love this." He says, "But it sounds to me like you're playing a lot on it." I said, "I am." I said, yes, I'm playing a lot on it. I needed to be there. The musicians, they needed some guidance and support because Kenny had never had a band. So they were always looking to me, well, what are we going to do? And when are we going to rehearse? And so the idea I floated with Kenny was, let's talk about doing me sitting in with you. And then I'll introduce you to my audiences. You'll come out first. They'll hear you sing. You bring me in, sitting in. We'll do this album. And then I'm going to jump ship. And your next album will be there. You'll be established. You'll have an audience that I can help bring to you.
Smart plan.
Clive Davis did not like the idea at all. And you know what? I have to say he was absolutely right in what he was thinking, because his thoughts were, look, why do I want to invest in a band that's going to break up first record? Right. And I said, well, it's not really going to break up. He said, well, you're not going to be there. And I said, well, I can be there. I don't necessarily have to be there on stage. I said, look, Stan Getz, Charlie Bird. Stan Getz set him with, Charlie Bird set him with Stan Getz. Death Stefano was an incredible album. Let's look at Leon Russell. Look at the stuff with Joe Cocker. Look at the stuff with Leon.
Mad Dogs and Englishmen, sure.
Yeah, I said, it's a way in which I can help to support this album. And it's the only way that I can see right now that he's going to get the attention that he needs. And you're going to get your money's worth in promotion. He reluctantly said yes. And I think he was right in worrying about that. But what happens is that later, that first album, I think it sold 150,000 or 200,000 units. He came to me and said, I'd like for you to consider staying with Kenny because he said, I know how much you want to produce. I know how much you'd like to, But he said, this is an opportunity that only happens once in a lifetime for a lot of people.
Right.
And he said, this is something I'd like for you to consider. And I said, well, I will, but you're going to need to talk to Kenny about this too. This is his career too.
Right, because Kenny wanted to be a solo artist, didn't he?
Well, of course. And so they talked to Kenny, and Kenny came back to me, and I said, well, what do you think? And he says, well, this is working. We should probably keep it together. And I said, I'm okay with it, but you have to understand that I'm going to continue to produce. And if I say this isn't working, we need to do something different. You're going to need to accept that and be okay with it. And he goes, yeah, I think I can do that. It's not a problem. So under the auspices of how we had been working, we went forward. Clive wanted to call it Messina and Loggins. And I said, no, I want to call it Loggins Messina, because the truth is I am going to leave at some point in time. And I don't want that to necessarily hurt Kenny in any way. And I felt that was the best way to do it.
So you guys end up making 6 albums together, and it's not just, any 6 albums. These albums become so successful. The second album has your song, Thinking of You, which is, smash. Your Mama Don't Dance, smash.
Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. Your mama don't dance and your daddy don't rock and roll. When evening rolls around and it's time to go to town, where do you go? To rock and roll. The old folks say that you gotta end your day by 10. If you're out on a date and you bring it home late, it's a sin.
Angry Eyes is on the second album.
You wanna believe that I am not the same as you. I can't conceive, oh Lord, of what it is you're trying to do with those angry eyes. Well, I bet you wish you could cut me down with those angry eyes. What a shot you could be if you could shoot at me with those angry eyes.
Third album is My Music, your song, with you on lead vocals, a love song, Kenny's song, later covered by Anne Murray. So Loggins and Messina end up selling close to 20 million records. This is not, Clive was right. It was a once-in-a-lifetime thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I look back and I look at all that music and I think, wow, we created some great music. I don't know that I could do that again today, although I'm reproducing a lot of that stuff on stage, and it is a lot of work. I work to keep the arrangements identically the same, and audiences are loving it. But I realized that we put a lot of effort and energy into making those records sound the way that they did. And at 78 years old, I'm singing sometimes 5 nights in a row. I'm singing all the songs, not just half of the songs. I'm working harder now than I ever have in my life, but I'm enjoying it.
Well, the set list, like we talked about, is stacked, because it's like if you loved Jim's work with Loggins and Messina, it's there. If you love Jim's work with Poco, it's there. If you love Jim's solo albums, it's there. If you love the Springfield stuff, it's there. And it's a long set. This is not like, hey, come out, we'll play 5 or 6 songs and good night. You're working really hard, like you said.
Well, I I have to take a break in the middle. The way that set is structured, by the time I get to the last song, "Your Mama Don't Dance," and then I think we were coming it with a "Dragging the Line," which I had changed late the last set and brought "She's Got a Rock" in there because it kind of relaxes a little bit more. And then, I fire at the second song, and by the end of the set, and I don't eat before I go on. I cannot eat a dinner. So I eat an apple or some carrots, something like that. By the time the show is over, not only am I exhausted, but I'm starving to death.
So, these shows, like we said, with the Roadrunners, you guys will be out everywhere, dates locked in from May on that we see. Talk about, before we wrap up, talk about sitting in again when you and Kenny decide to kind of do it again in, 2005 and then 2009?
2005, I didn't realize how big a show they wanted. They asked us to put together a 3-hour show.
Right.
That was a good 28 to 30 songs. And it took 5 weeks of working 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, with a great band of musicians to pull those arrangements together. Stephen Yevas, who's now with me, is on the road, was there in 2005 and 2009. We had Shem on bass. We had Stevie DeStanislaw on drums. We had Gabe Witcher on violin. We had Gabe Dixon on keyboards. These are all just first-class musicians. They work so hard to get those arrangements. If you listen to the album that we cut at the Santa Barbara Bowl,
Sitting in again,
it's amazing. Again, the effort that was put out to bring life to that music. And Kenny was really at his best. I think he, of course, having had his solo career, he had developed, his vocal skills had become even greater than they had been. So he was freer. He really brought a lot to my song, Peace of Mind, in the trilogy.
Right.
We did an extension to that, and his vocal parts were just sensational. It was a wonderful experience. I mean, from a creative standpoint, we both had grown, and we both were able to bring something to that performance that we hadn't in our younger days. It was more mature.
When it's happening, and you guys are in your early 20s, it's a much different thing, to revisit it when you're middle-aged and mature and you've lived some life. And it sounds like it should have been a lot of fun.
It was fun, but it was a lot of work. And we did 3-hour shows, and so
that's a lot.
It was by the time the evening was over, we were pretty burned.
But there must have been a demand for it because you did it 4 years later in 2009.
Yeah, and there was. I think there would still be a demand today if both of us were in a way in which we could do something like
Right.
that.
Right. Well, for now, it's you and the Roadrunners. There's a great live album that was released around a year ago called Here, There, and Everywhere, which is a good representation of what this great band sounds like live. And are you looking, like I said, it's the end of March in 2026 when we're recording this. Are you looking to be on the road for most of the year?
Yeah, our agent had wanted us, because I don't want to work really any more than 12 dates of a month. I'm not a road dog anymore. I've got a family, and I don't want to be out there on the road all the time. But I'm happy to work, 15 days out of the month. But I want to be 15 days home too, to split it up. So we were just going out for 4 to 6 dates, and he said, let me put together 21 dates. I mean, that's 4, 8, 12. That's like going out for 3 months. Instead, you do it in 3 weeks. And so this last run we did was one of those. Actually, in November, we did a long one, but then we were off for December, January, February.
Right.
And I said, it's killing me to have to get my voice back up to shape and get my parts back up. So let's work every month, even if it's 4 days of the month, and we'll do long runs, but keep me working through at least 9 months out of the year. And then that way I can do my job. I'm in shape. It's like an athlete. If you can't do a 100-yard dash if you haven't been working up to get there.
You got to keep training. But the great thing is that the audience is there, and the audience loves these songs, and they love seeing you and the band live. And, I would recommend that while Jim and the band are out there, that everyone who's listening to this goes checks them out and listens to the live album from last year, Here, There, and Everywhere. And Jim, I really appreciate your time. I know how busy you are. I appreciate you spending some time with us today.
My pleasure. And it was good to speak with you. He brought up some questions that I haven't thought about in a long time, but especially those people who helped me get started, back in the days with Mike Giroux and Glenn Edwards. I have to pay tribute to the people who have helped me get to where I am.
Yeah, and since you started so young, you've been doing it so well, so long, that it's an absolute pleasure. So Jim Messina, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
And even though we ain't got money, I'm so in love with you, honey, and everything will bring a chain of love. And in the morning when I rise, bring a tear of joy to my eyes and tell me everything's gonna be alright.
Thanks to Jim Messina for joining us this week. Jim is a true multi-hyphenate whose fingerprints are all over some of the most beloved music of the 60s, 70s, and beyond. From Buffalo Springfield to Poco to the chart-topping run of Loggins and Messina, his work helped define an era, blending rock, country, and pure California spirit into songs that have stood the test of time. Jim is still performing live with his band, the Roadrunners. For current tour dates, visit jimmessina.com. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow Rock and Roll High School wherever you get your podcasts, and share it with someone who loves great songs and the stories behind them. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time for another episode of Rock and Roll High School.
Rock and Roll High School is a presentation of Pure Tone Music, produced by Pete Ganbarg with assistance from Steve Leeds, Joe Pomerico, Dana Stenson, Aaron Menuza, Christina Katsamanides, and Rich Mahan. Please visit our website at rockschoolpodcast.com for past episodes and information on what's coming next. All rights reserved.